A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Cam Edwards, your host. Glad to have you with us today. Coming up on the program, we're going to take a look at what's going on in the not-so-Super Tuesday primaries, including a stop by former Vice President Joe Biden in Michigan, where he is expected to win. This, by the way, could seal the deal for Joe Biden. If he does win the Michigan primary 2016, Bernie Sanders actually upset Hillary Clinton there, but the latest polling out of Michigan showing Biden with a fairly substantial lead. So Biden could basically wrap up the nomination with a strong performance on Tuesday, but he had anything but a strong performance as he was talking with factory workers, got into a bit of an argument over guns with one of the folks there, Bo Erickson of CBS, tweeting about it. Joe Biden telling a man who accused him of, quote, actively trying to end our Second Amendment right that you're, quote, full of He said, I support the Second Amendment, Biden did. Listen, you gotta see this entire exchange. And I apologize already. The audio is kind of bad, but I think that you can muddle through this and make out this interaction between Joe Biden and, frankly, somebody who knows, it sounds like a heck of a lot more than Biden does about Biden's own plans.
You are actively trying to diminish your Second Amendment right to take away your gun.
You're full of shit. No, shush. Shush. I support the Second Amendment. Second Amendment, just like right now, if you yell fire, that's not free speech. But from the very beginning, I have a shotgun, I have a 20 gauge, a 12 gauge, my son's hunt. Guess what? You're not allowed to own any weapons. I'm not taking your gun away at all. You need 100 rounds.
So when you were in Veto and you said you're going to take our guns,
I did not say that. That's not true. I did not say that.
Video.
It's a viral video like the other ones they're putting out that are simply a lie.
Your voice, you said that you're taking the guns.
Oh,
he just clarified it.
Wait. Take your AR-14s and what?
Okay, this is not okay.
Hold on. Hey, let's get
Don't tell me
moving.
this, pal.
There's a lot of guys wanting.
I'm not working.
Thanks so much.
Give me a break.
Thanks so much.
Don't be such a
You're
worry
pushing up
bag.
on me.
Hey, there's a lot of things.
Look, here's the deal. Here's the deal. Are you able to own a machine gun?
I own a machine gun.
I said, are you able to own one? Under law.
Machine guns are illegal.
That's right. So AR-15s are legal.
How is that in a machine gun?
No, it's not.
Semi-automatic.
Yeah, do you need 100 rounds? Do you need 100 rounds?
In America with handguns, and there are what you call assault rifles. Why are you advocating for assault rifles when people are buying a handgun?
I mean, that was pretty amazing, right? In the span of 90 seconds or so, Biden completely misrepresents his own campaign platform. And we're going to get back to that. Confuses AR-15s and machine. Well, first of all, confuses AR-15s with AR-14s. And then says, yeah, machine guns, right? Can you own a machine gun? By the way, this is where they both got stuff wrong because, yeah, you can own a machine gun. You have to register under the National Firearms Act. But the gentleman said, oh, no, it's illegal. And Biden, well, yeah, we're going to make it illegal for AR-15s too. Okay, then now you're talking about banning guns. So here's what Biden's campaign platform actually says when it comes to a ban on so-called assault weapons. Biden's proposal is a squidge different than Beto O'Rourke's hell yes, we're coming for your AR-15s. O'Rourke, called for a mandatory, quote unquote, he called it a buyback, not a buyback. It's a compensated confiscation is what he wanted, right? If you own one of these firearms, you can either hand them over to the government for some cash or you can become a criminal. Biden's plan is, in essence, the same as O'Rourke's plan with one additional step. Under Biden's plan, all existing gun owners could either hand over their guns to the government in exchange for some cash, a compensated confiscation program, or, and again, this is from Biden's campaign here, or they could register their firearms, their banned firearms, under the auspices of the National Firearms Act. Biden would also do the same for magazines, by the way. You could either turn over your quote unquote high capacity magazines, or you could register your magazines under the National Firearms Act. Now, apparently nobody with Biden's campaign is actually taking a look at the National Firearms Act, because I don't know how on earth you would register a firearm magazine to begin with, much less under the National Firearms Act. You don't have a sort of, a serial number for these magazines. And when it comes to actually registering existing firearms under the National Firearms Act, the NFA is not really equipped to do that. This isn't about going back and telling people, well, you got to register these things. Biden's plan doesn't make any sense, which is why I suspect at some point, especially now that he's told Beto O'Rourke, hey, you're going to be my gun control guy. I would not be shocked if at some point Biden says, yeah, we're just going with Beto's plan. And it'll be the ban on sales and possession going forward, ban on manufacturing going forward, and you've got the option of handing your guns over to the government exchange for pennies on the dollar, or you can become a criminal. Because Biden's plan is absolutely O'Rourke's plan is absolutely unworkable too, from a practical standpoint, when we talk about compliance rates and things of that nature. But it's doable in theory. Like, you could pass the ban and you could have these compensated confiscation events. I don't know how many people will show up, but you could do those things. Whereas it literally is impossible to do what Biden says he wants to do with firearms and magazines under the National Firearms Act. I know it's bizarre, but this is where the Democratic primary is at this point in time. And, it's very telling, I think, that the average voter knows more about this issue than the average Democrat running for president. Right? I mean, how sad is that? If you're going to be out there touting, I took on the NRA and I did all these, I passed the gun ban, and you can't speak beyond these pithy little sound bites, because as soon as you do, you sound like a moron, or you sound like you're completely ignorant on this subject. I mean, that should be an issue. Sadly, I think, again, when it comes to gun control supporters, many of them have this same lack of knowledge. And so I don't know how much this is actually going to hurt Joe Biden with non-gun owners and with gun control supporters. They may not have even heard anything wrong. And they certainly don't know the intricacies of the National Firearms Act, understand why Biden's campaign platform is so problematic. They just know, he's going after guns. Oh, good. Now, when it comes to, this assertion from Biden that he supports the Second Amendment, he may truly believe that, but I don't think that he does. And here's a question that I wish would have been asked of both Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, actually, during their town hall before the primaries on Tuesday. I asked this question of the Brady campaign the other day online. I never got an answer back, not surprising. But, if you're a supporter of the Second Amendment, supposedly, if you're not anti-gun, supposedly, if you are simply in favor of a few common sense gun safety laws, supposedly, give me an example of something then that would go too far. Give me an example of a gun control proposal that you think would violate the right to keep and bear arms. Wouldn't you love to hear that question asked and answered from a gun control supporter? Because Biden, he's talking, oh yeah, look, I got a shotgun. That's great. I got a 12 gauge, I got a 20 gauge. I support the Second Amendment, my son's hunt. It's fantastic. But that doesn't mean you support the Second Amendment just because you own a gun, right? The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Is that what you support? Because that's the Second Amendment. And I don't think Biden does. Biden does not believe that the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. In fact, Biden might say, I do believe that. I just think that we can, again, ban commonly owned firearms, commonly owned magazines. We can require a license to own a firearm. And none of these things would amount to an infringement on the fundamental individual rights of American citizens. I disagree. I suspect that you disagree as well. All right, we're going to get to some of your emails here in just a minute or two, but right now let's get to today's armed citizen story, our recidivist report. our good deed of the day. We'll start with our recidivist report out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, where a man has received probation in an armed robbery case out of Eau Claire. Probation because the most serious charges that he was facing in this armed robbery were dropped. 29-year-old Lucas Grabs pleaded no contest to a felony count of possession of methamphetamine and a misdemeanor count of possession of a firearm while intoxicated. And in exchange, you ready for this? Felony charges of armed robbery, as well as possession of a firearm by an outstate felon, and a misdemeanor count of possession of drug paraphernalia were dismissed. He was fined $1,036, and he will spend 30 months on probation. Grabs was one of 3 men charged in connection, according to Chippewa.com, with an armed robbery. 2 people robbed at gunpoint in a vehicle outside of a convenience store. So Lucas Grabs, a felon in possession of a firearm and drugs, and the most serious charges are dismissed, and he ends up walking away with 30 months probation. As a condition of his probation, Chippewa.com says Grabs cannot have contact with his co-defendants or use or possess firearms. No kidding. He can't do that anyway. Why? Because he's a convicted felon. And here you have somebody who is responsible, at least in part, for a violent crime. And in Wisconsin, where Governor Tony Evers has been demanding more gun control laws, the criminal justice system says, okay, Mr. Felon in possession of a firearm who engaged in an armed robbery, come here. Come here. Stand right here. Don't do that again. and go on. We'll see you 30 months from now. I mean, it's absolutely unbelievable. But again, stories like this is why we have a segment called the Recidivist Report each and every day, because this is what happens on a daily basis in our criminal justice system. While politicians talk about cracking down on legal gun ownership, violent criminals are getting away with violent crimes and not doing any time behind bars as a result. Now, our armed citizen story of the day from, this is from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Fox 55 in Fort Wayne, Indiana, where an armed citizen ended up breaking up a fight and an attack involving a bat at a Walmart in South Bend, Indiana. Yes, Fort Wayne, Indiana, excuse me. South Bend, well, that's Mayor Pete's territory, right? Police, according to Fox 55, say a bystander armed with a gun kept a brutal baseball bat beating on Saturday from being even worse. Fort Wayne police say that the bystander pulled out their legally carried firearm when they saw a masked man beating the victim in a Walmart parking lot just before 10:30 Saturday morning. Police say the man got back into his burgundy Chevy Impala, then drove away. Detectives spotted the vehicle, tried to pull it over, but was unsuccessful. Police say officers in Wells County tried to pull it over as well, but were unable to pull the car over. Eventually, they found, arrested, and charged 21-year-old Levi Arnold of Bluffton with attempted murder. Police say they were tipped off to Arnold by someone who recognized the car from a separate incident. Now, what's crazy, Fox 55 says that according to Sergeant Sofia Rosales Scatena, police believe that this was a random attack, that this wasn't a case of, somebody beating up his girlfriend's or his ex-girlfriend's new boyfriend or something like that. They say, quote, it appears that Arnold just snapped. Well, thankfully, again, there was an armed citizen there when Arnold just snapped, and was able to defuse that situation, prevent that crime from escalating any further. Hopefully the victim is going to recover from their injuries, and hopefully Mr. Arnold doesn't get a slap on the wrist and end up as one of our recidivist reports here in the near future. Finally today, our good deed of the day from Indiana. This is WSBT with the story of a 93-year-old woman in St. Joseph County, Indiana, whose home was on fire. 2 officers able to get to that woman and rescue her from the flames before the fire trucks even arrived. Again, WSBT says that Clara Webb, 93 years of age, could not get out of her home in Osceola on Saturday morning. Her son-in-law, Marvin Bua, said, I was thinking about my mother-in-law handicapped in bed with a crushed hip and trying to get her out of there, and there was no way I could do it. However, Corporal Chris Bowling with the St. Joseph's County Police Department, first on scene there, he said the protocol is to stay outside, to wait for the fire department to show up because they've got the proper gear to go in. He said, I didn't know that we could wait that long. So protocol out the window, and Corporal Chris Bowling into the house. He said he crawled into the home, said the clouds of dark smoke were too much. He went back to his patrol car, grabbed a gas mask. He said, I put it back on, went back in, was able to crawl back in, find her, talk to her, and pull her out. Corporal Jay Dooley also went into the home when he arrived, helping to extricate the woman from the home. He said, quote, you have to make a decision when you get there. You can't just ask, well, where's the fire department at? He said, go, see what you can do. So Corporal Jay Dooley, Corporal Chris Bowling with the St. Joseph's County Police Department in the right place at the right time, willing and able to do the right thing. We thank you both for your very, very good deeds. Now, before we get out of here, let's get to a couple of emails, shall we? Email address, by the way, cam.edwards@bearingarms.com. John writing in with a question about the town hall on Fox with Bernie Sanders. He said, last night, Sanders once again credited China for lifting millions of people out of abject poverty. As the better student of history, would you say that he is essentially giving credit to Nixon and Kissinger for the feat? Bernie would not say that, to be sure. And I don't really know how much credit you'd want to give Nixon and Kissinger for this either. Although, again, Nixon going to China in the 1970s may have helped allow the country to open up a little bit. But and look, I'll be honest with you, I'm not an expert in Chinese communism, but from my understanding and from my reading of history, so, China, during World War II, China was basically going through a civil war. You had the nationalists and then you had the communists. The nationalists ended up losing the civil war and retreated to Taiwan. So when you have the Republic of China, Taiwan, that's the nationalists. That's basically the losing side of that civil war. Mao and the Chinese communists ended up winning that civil war, right? And from the 1940s through the early 1970s, and really even, through the 1940s through the 1970s, you had a series of efforts by Mao and the Chinese Communist Party to raise the standard of living and to bring China into modern times. And they all ended up in disastrous failures. Whether it was the Great Leap Forward, where, Mao had this great idea of, okay, we're going to, every backyard is going to be a steel factory, basically, and we're all going to make steel. And they had these little smelters, and they were producing, as you might imagine, really inferior steel. There were a Cultural Revolution in the late 1960s. I mean, look, there were a lot of issues with communist China. And basically what I think allowed China to become the manufacturing powerhouse that it has become was the decision by the communist Chinese in the 80s to say, okay, Soviet-style communism doesn't work. Cuban-style communism, I mean, we're not going to take our cues from Cuba. They're a client state of ours anyway. But they decided to have an experiment. And I'm being grossly simplistic here. But the experiment was this. What if we allow private industry to operate? And what if we allow people to become consumers? You can purchase luxury goods. You can have all of these things that you can earn and you can buy. Will allow you that sort of limited economic freedom. But we're keeping all of these other freedoms to ourselves. So you don't have freedom of speech. You don't have freedom of movement. There are no other political parties in China, but you can buy an Apple, right? You can buy a Mac. You can buy an iPhone. You can buy a new car, but you can't think for yourself. You can't speak for yourself. You can't say what's on your mind. And, the scary thing is, I think to me, John, is that was enough for a lot of people. I don't think that it's easily replicated here in the United States, because I think one of the reasons why it was enough for a lot of people in China is because that was an expansion of their freedom. Oh, look, we now have a little bit more purchasing power. Oh, look, we can now buy these things that we couldn't buy before. Things that were not available to us are now available to us. So their world did open up, but we already have that. And so in order to bring about, Chinese style authoritarianism, we wouldn't expand our freedom. We would lose our freedom. We would lose our ability to speak our mind. We would lose our freedom of speech. We would lose our ability to criticize our government. We would lose our ability to think for ourselves and to speak for ourselves and to have that basic fundamental individual freedom. And then, of course, the right to keep our arms does not exist in China either. So, from a matter of perspective, I think Sanders is looking at China. Wow, imagine what they did. Yeah, they had decades of screw ups. And even then, when they only opened up the economic market, they still are depriving all of their residents from living in a free society. And Bernie might be okay with that, but I'm not. Let's see. Also heard from Craig, who says, I've been a listener for many years. From the NRA days, now bearing arms. Craig, thank you for that very much. I appreciate it. Craig says, your voice is so important in the gun movement. I appreciate the amount of time and passion you bring to the topic. Well, thank you very much. Craig says, now, if I can make a comment about the March 6th podcast. Of course. You don't have to butter me up to do that, by the way. If you got something on your mind, that's fine. Just lay it out there. Craig says, I have no idea the medical qualifications of John Stokes, but I do know that he's in the business of preparedness, which I think on the whole is a wise and good thing. With that said, Craig says, I thought that his take on the coronavirus was overly hyped, bordering on the kind of hysteria that we've seen by the legacy media. I have a very close family member who I called immediately after the show to share what I heard from a statistical and potential pandemic point of view. Craig says, I won't share the bulk of that conversation other than to say that she felt like much of what was said in terms of coronavirus was to be taken with a large grain of salt. So as to not fly under false colors here, Craig says, I have no professional expertise on the subject myself. This family member, however, holds a PhD in virology, is a successful medical writer, and in fact did an internship at the CDC. I only write this, says Craig, in the hopes that you may consider an alternate perspective to Mr. Stokes. And he says, finally, I hope this letter doesn't come across as chastising, as that's not my intent. Absolutely not, Craig. Hey, listen, the show's called Cam and Company. You're part of the company. You are more than allowed your opinion. This isn't communist China, Craig. You can write in and say whatever you want to me. And I do appreciate your perspective. My perspective is I did not feel like John was overly alarmist. And John is not somebody with a background in medicine, either am I. But that really, to me, that wasn't the focus of what our conversation was about. Because from my perspective, look, there's still a lot that we don't know. And I don't believe that frankly, I don't think that panic is ever a good thing. So I don't believe that there's ever a time to panic. But I don't believe that panic is going to be useful or helpful or is even necessary at this point in time. Having said that, we are, as I said on Twitter yesterday, we're swimming in uncharted waters right now. We just had the entire nation of Italy basically go on a modified lockdown. Now, it's not that people are going to be stuck in their homes exclusively for 2 weeks at a time. Restaurants are still going to be open from like 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. But there's, supposed to be keeping 3 feet away from people. Sporting events are not going to have spectators. There are major changes that are happening temporarily, in a first world Western country. And I don't think it's alarmist to say, hey, we should get ready for perhaps something similar, if not nationwide, perhaps where you live. I thought the analogy that John used about, look, we know that there's a hurricane out in the Gulf. We don't know what category it's going to be when it comes on shore. We don't know where exactly it's going to, come on shore, but we know that it's out there and we know that it's tracking this way. I think it's a really good way to look at it. Santa Clara County in California just banned mass gatherings of over 1,000 people. So the San Jose Sharks, for instance, which play in Santa Clara County, they've not been impacted by any of the restrictions going forward, but now apparently they will be. Right. So you're already starting to see major sporting events. The Ivy League canceling its basketball tournament because of fears of the coronavirus. I don't know where exactly we're going. And I don't know exactly what things are going to look like 2 months from now, but I have a pretty good feeling that for the next couple of months, things are going to be really strange. Things are not going to be normal. Now, the abnormalities that are coming over the next couple of months are not going to be the new normal, right? It's not going to stay this way. It's not like we're all going to turn into hermits and for the rest of our lives we, only peek out the windows and we run outside to grab our mail and we run back in the house. Like, that's not going to happen. But the next couple of months could be kind of bonkers. And so my attitude is be prepared as much as possible to try to mitigate personally the weirdness that is coming to one degree or another. And again, look, we're going to get through this. The coronavirus is not the Black Plague, as Stephen King said. I can't remember the last time I quoted Stephen King approvingly, but as Stephen King said over the weekend, it's not Captain Trips, right? This isn't The Stand, where we're not looking at the collapse of civilization. We're not. And anybody who tells you that we are, I think is overhyping this. But we are looking at something that is unprecedented for most of us. We have not really gone through anything like this in our lifetime. The closures and the attempts to mitigate the spread of this disease are going to involve steps that many of us have not seen in our lifetime. And, again, I think it's a wise thing to at least be somewhat prepared for, a couple of weeks worth of disruptions where it might not be as easy as it was to go to the grocery store and pick up a couple of things and to get those staples when they run out. I think that, again, there's no guarantee that your life is going to be upended. And I think that any upheaval that we see, again, is going to be temporary. But I do want people to take this seriously, because this does have the potential to have some serious economic impacts. It already is, I think, having some serious economic impacts. And the spillover from the economic impacts could resonate for a little bit. And as we, again, try to stop the spread of this virus, that's going to involve a lot of things that are just unusual and different and outside of the norm. So I hope you appreciate my perspective. I would love to talk more about this. We've actually had a pretty good response about the show where we talked with John Stokes. So I would perfectly willing, and in fact, would love to have more voices talking about this issue and different perspectives. So, Craig, thank you for writing in, man. I do appreciate it. And again, anytime you got something to say, I don't mind. I love hearing from you. It doesn't have to be, just pats on the back either. You got something that I said or a guest said that you hold on a second here. Yeah, I want to hear that too. Anyway, I appreciate you being a part of the program today. Thank you so much for your time, for your interest, for listening, watching, sharing, and spreading this program. You can do so by subscribing to Town Hall Media at YouTube. Also, you can go to Apple Podcasts. You can go to Spotify, Stitcher, townhall.com's podcast page as well. And if you go to bearingarms.com, you can become a VIP member of bearingarms.com. Get exclusive commentary, analysis, and more. If you become a VIP Gold member, you get exclusive commentary analysis across the Town Hall Media family of websites. That's an even better deal. All right, thank you so much for being a part of the program today. We will be back tomorrow with the latest Second Amendment news and information from all across the nation. Have even more of your emails as well. Have a great rest of your 2A Tuesday. We'll see you back here soon with another edition of Bearing Arms, Cam & Company.